This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Welcome to the OI podcast, the Otago Institute podcast, conversations with experts from the worlds of arts, sciences and Mātauranga Māori, brought to you by the Otago Institute, the Otago branch of the Royal Society for Arts and Sciences. Kia ora, nau mai, haere mai, and welcome to the second episode for 2026.
Crikey, we're back again,
We're
folks.
back again, folks. Happy New Year. If you didn't catch last week's episode, we highly recommend that you go back and listen to Dr. Jenny Hodgson speaking about connectivity and conservation prioritisation. But today we have in the studio Dr. Stephen Cornell, Theoretical Ecology and Modelling. Welcome, Stephen.
Lovely to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
It's going to be amazing today. It's going to be an amazing talk. We're going to start off by saying
Who we are while we're here.
who we are and why we're here. Exactly. Who we are and why we're here. So those new to the OI podcast, Happy New Year. Welcome to the OI podcast. I'm Dr. Barb, a quantitative ecologist with a background in modelling, climate change, biodiversity, conservation prioritisation, SciComm, and a PhD in botany from the Ōtākau Whakaihu Waka, the University of Otago.
Well done, you, Barbara. Go Dr. Barb. So I'm Trudi, and I've got a background in humanities and economics, sociology, politics, international affairs, and life. Master of all trades, Jack and none. No, the other way around. Jack of all trades, master.
No, neither. And obviously with a wrangling Dr. Barb PhD right at the top there. So we hope that you enjoy our mix of conversations with experts in as wide a range of subjects as we can find from the worlds of art, science, Mātauranga Māori. For those of you who are old friends returning, thank you very much.
Exactly.
Sticking
Welcome
with
back.
us.
Nice
Welcome
to
back.
be back
It's
with you.
nice to have you. Hey, Dr. Stephen Cornell, all the way here from the UK winter. Thank you for coming.
Yes, it's lovely to be here in this balmy, warm weather.
Yes, well, we're having
Not
a heat
rainy
wave.
or-
We're having
not
a heat
rainy or
wave.
windy at all.
No. And Reader, University of Liverpool, theoretical biologist.
Yes, honorary reader now because I'm retired.
And remind us what your BA and PhD were and from where.
So I did my undergraduate in Oxford in physics, and then my DPhil also in physics in Oxford. And my DPhil was in statistical physics. So statistical physics is the branch of physics that's to do with the what happens when you've got a large number of very similar things together. So it's kind of a sociology of atoms.
Oh,
I like that. A sociology of atoms.
Yes, I haven't used that phrase for several decades now. But anyway, so statistical physics is really, it encompasses things like how gases behave, solids. It's largely traditionally to do with those sorts of systems where you have many atoms. The atoms are all identical in principle, but they behave in very peculiar ways because you have very many of them. So, for example, the kinds of things that you can get when you have very many atoms in a solid is you can get phase transitions where there's a sudden change from one kind of behaviour to a different kind of behaviour. It changes from a liquid into a gas, for example.
Oh, like
so is this the ecology of atoms, perhaps?
You can say that, yes. Yeah. I mean, of course, we'll probably get into that a little bit later on, but indeed, it's about the way that many different things interact and how you get emergent phenomena, if there isn't too much jargon, that comes out of the relatively simple interactions between individuals, and how that scales up to what happens at much larger scales.
And does that encompass sort of threshold effects as well?
Absolutely, yes. That's kind of when I was doing physics, which was quite a long time ago. That was, I guess, one of the most important things that people looked at. People looked at what's called critical phenomena, which is the way that you get a threshold where you get a sudden change. So it can include, I've mentioned already, changes from liquid into gas, but also it can be a magnet stopping being a permanent magnet and becoming a non-permanent magnet, if that doesn't sound a little bit too boring.
Yeah.
Intermittently magnetic, perhaps. I don't know.
Well, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because it's all those sort of things where you might think that things are just going along a little bit. There's hardly any change at all. It's just a little bit, and then all of a sudden, you basically fall off a cliff, or there's some point which maybe nothing's really changed. It's just got to the point where now
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So that's very much the sort of thing that can happen when you've got a large number of things interacting. I mean, the special cases in physics are 0, 1, and infinity, if you like.
Oh,
so when you have numbers of atoms which are in the sort of the 10 to the 26, what's that?
A large number.
A billion, say, atoms. Then that's so large that in fact it's almost as if there's an infinite number, and so you get very sharp changes.
Right.
Whereas if you only had 3 or 4, then the changes would indeed be quite gradual. But threshold behaviour, indeed, that's a very important part of physics, as was popular then. I mean, I've been out of physics now for several decades,
and into ecology.
And into ecology, indeed. So. In ecology, the sorts of things which you'll find is that what would be good examples?
Invasion thresholds. Or...
Yes, I was trying to find one which was more to do with collective behaviour rather than. Yeah, I mean, I guess actually this.
Can I bring up the passenger pigeon again, where things have to be so common that they're common enough to breed, and then at some point there's too few of them. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's going in the opposite direction. But some species have to be common in order to exist with their system of existing, and then they get to a point where there's still lots of them around, but they're not common enough that they suddenly don't work.
So I shouldn't be asking the questions, but why, in what way is commonness important for the passenger pigeon?
Yeah, I think you need to expand on this whole passenger pigeon thing.
Yeah.
It's putting me on the spot now. It's sort of that idea that it's part of it is breeding meeting, like if you're not common enough, but part of it's also kind of how you defend yourself, like you're in a herd, and if you're suddenly not in a herd. Right, yeah. I mean, so there's a lot of species, just generalise it out of the passenger pigeon because it's not really my specialty area because it's a bird. But it's that kind of idea that you have, some species have to be common in order to exist. Like they just don't do well as rare species, whereas some species are meant to be rare and are good at being rare. And it's it's that sort of idea where you've got a whole lot of individuals, so you can have something that eats them. But there'll be enough of them. But there's enough of them that survive, so they can survive. Or you have a population that's big enough so that the individuals are common enough that there'll be some amount of long distance dispersal, or some amount of recruitment into the next generation, or some amount of ability to find a mate that works.
Yeah, so I made a distinction there between absolute number and density. So density means number per unit area. So things can be scarce because there's a small number per unit area, but they can still be a very large number just extended over a very large area.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're looking at, for example, finding a mate, you've got to be able to find a mate within walking distance, let's say, or getting on your bike distance kind of thing.
Flying distance.
So flying distance, for
example. Your soulmate
yes.
should be within close proximity of you.
Absolutely, yes. I agree with that.
If one believes in soulmates.
Indeed, yes. But anyway, so...
Well, it's no use if your soulmate's in India and you're stuck in New Zealand, is it?
Well, then you go out and explore.
So that's the OE.
Yeah.
Yeah, but there's a distinction between the sort of threshold that's to do with a density effect. So
right.
If you're looking at a disease, for example, a disease to transmit between hosts, let's think of it as a plant disease just because plants don't move around very much. So you're an infected stalk of maize, you've got a virus on you, and this virus then spreads. It'll only spread so far. So if you plant your maize in a very low density, it won't manage to reach the next maize plant, and so the disease won't spread.
I get it now. Yeah.
And if it's sufficiently densely planted, then the disease can spread. So that's a threshold that's to do with density. And then there are other thresholds which are to do with absolute number. So that's really why I was mentioning the if you're it's not really to do with thresholds, the absolute number. It's to do with how sharp transitions can be.
Right.
So having a very large number in total is not about having a large density locally. It's about the fact that there's it's quite a mathematical thing, but it's like there's it's hard to explain.
There's a lot of them.
Yeah, if we go back to the maize, if we didn't want the virus to spread too quickly, then you would plant your crops less dense.
Yeah, that's right, yes.
Or with gaps between them.
Yeah.
So that the disease can't
go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Gaps.
So if you get rid of those stepping stones, those few
connectivity.
It's the connectivity.
Absolutely,
Back
yes.
to last week's.
Absolutely. So, connectivity as an idea, I get you've explored it in the context of conservation biology, but it's the same idea exists in epidemiology too.
With epidemiology being the study
of
transmission of diseases.
The dynamics of infectious diseases.
Oh, yeah.
Dynamics of infectious diseases.
That's probably not the best definition of it, because epidemiology means that there are things called epidemics. We know what epidemics are. They're diseases.
Yeah, we
It
do
is
now.
in the common lexicon now, as they say, epidemics.
Yeah, but epidemiology is not actually the study of epidemics per se. Epidemiology is actually the study of the causes of disease.
Oh, right.
But there's a branch of epidemiology, which is the branch that I've been involved with, which is, let's call it ecological epidemiology or population epidemiology.
So it's kind of the spread of disease or the vectors.
That's right, yes. It's the spread of disease through populations. So there are people who call themselves epidemiologists who don't really know much about medicine, but their specialty, like me, is building mathematical models which describe how diseases spread from individuals to individuals.
Because you're not treating the disease, you're just seeing where it goes, what it does, and how it gets around, kind of thing.
Yes.
Yeah, it's sort of that information that people who are treating the disease need in order to know where to put the resources.
It's like that guy found out that cholera came from that one pump in London somewhere. Yeah.
So that would be an example of the more classical study of epidemiology about the finding the causes of diseases. That's
right.
Yeah.
So your work then as a theoretical ecologist...
Can I ask?
Oh, yes, sorry.
Can ecologists be... no, I thought all ecologists were theoretical because we don't go out. Or do we?
Field ecologists do field work.
Yeah, but they don't then set up...
experiments.
Well, yeah, okay, I'll bet. I might stop there. Okay.
Yeah, so I guess, like, for me... there's kind of applied ecology and field ecology and theoretical ecology.
Right.
And I don't know, are you just a purely theoretical ecologist?
I think it's fair to say I'm very much on the theoretical end. I have had in my career only a single PhD student who planned to do fieldwork, and in the end they abandoned the idea anyway. So,
right. Yeah, so fieldwork is actually tricky and takes a lot of time.
It's very hard, that's right. So ecology tends to be very theory heavy, in part because of how difficult the experiments are.
Right. Yeah, I was going to say it'd be hard to do a long run experiment.
Yeah. Well, my supervisor, one of my first supervisors, always said that the trouble is that finding replication is very difficult because we only have one Earth. And in order to do a proper experiment, we would need to run with multiple.
Yeah, it depends on the question you're asking, of course. I mean, if you're asking about why is the Earth the way it is, then of course you can't answer that question from just having a single replicate.
I made a very similar argument myself, and I said, well, we just need to find similar environments in different continents with different species pools, and therefore...
Again, it depends on the level that you're asking the question. If you're asking a smaller scale question, you can find replicates in that level.
Well, I was asking a question that required me to go to multiple continents to do my field work because I thought that would be way more fun.
Yeah.
Motivation, right.
Yeah. But I mean, the people do experiments in ecology with replicates. I mean, I was talking to you just actually yesterday, I think, about my colleague Stu Plaistow in Liverpool, who does experiments in oil tanks sunk into the ground in a very nice botanical garden on the Wirral in England, where they control the temperature and other aspects like whether or not predators can get it and such like. And they look at the dynamics of water fleas, Daphnia, and they have replicates because
that's water fleas out there for all those with a Kiwi accent there. Sorry, water fleas.
Yes, yes. So these they have these separate tanks where they can control the temperature, and they can manipulate it. So they have some which are say 5 degrees warmer. Actually, that would be quite a lot, maybe 2 degrees warmer. So you can to an extent do controlled experiments. The issue is that then you aren't studying a natural environment.
So it's that step, I think, where applied ecology. I used to call myself an applied theoretical ecologist or a theoretical applied ecologist, and I think that's that kind of with experimental ecology, you have to manipulate the system to such an extent to get an answer. But then you can use some of that data and put some of those assumptions into modelling, and then use the modelling to kind of extrapolate and explore different possible scenarios and then put probabilities on things. How do you feel about that as an explanation of theoretical modelling?
I think that's a good description of what the kind of theoretical modelling that you did, absolutely. I mean, there is a range. There are people who even more theoretical.
I'm on the applied end of theoretical modelling.
I know people who are much more applied than you, certainly. But yes, I mean, the ecology is hard both in terms of the experiments, but also the theory is very hard too. Mm-hmm. So getting back to, I mentioned physics at the start, that in physics you have large collections of atoms. I mean, the numbers are very, very big to begin with, and the atoms are identical, kind of literally identical. That's kind of a fundamental thing.
That's the fundamental thing. That's why physics is so easy and ecology is so hard, because even the species are all different, but the individuals of the species are different.
That's right. And so what you have to do in ecology instead is make these abstractions and these approximations where you assume
I'm saying educated guess, but perhaps I'm not in the right audience.
Educated guess
that's pretty accurate.
Yeah. I mean, educated guess is really the basis of Bayesian
statistics.
Oh, that's a whole different.
Well, let's not go completely. That's a whole different show. Let's not go completely off beam here.
I mean, we can look about that if you like, certainly. But there's.
Well, I thought I'd go back to the epidemiology because I thought there's a lot of people who their first kind of interaction with modelling of any sort, in this type of modelling, like not walking down a catwalk modelling, would have been around the pandemic. And I wondered how much, if at all, that had an influence on the work that you were doing, or where your type of modelling, because you've done something like pre-pandemic, you were already working in this area of sort of modelling the spread, maybe.
That's right, absolutely.
Of diseases.
Yeah.
And
so I switched from physics to biology back in the late 90s, and in 2001 there was an epidemic of foot and mouth disease.
That's right. Yes. I remember that actually. They were burning big pits full of cows and things all through the UK.
And that was, I think, actually the first time that modelling had a sort of a high-profile impact on policy in the UK.
And so what was the modelling used for there?
So the aim then was the questions were to say, what on earth do we do about controlling this foot and mouth disease epidemic? So what wasn't clear was whether there was any point trying to vaccinate some animals. There was a general belief that the vaccine might stop disease but not stop transmission. So it might be useful.
All sounding very eerily familiar.
And then there was a question of how is the disease transmitted? So we didn't know whether it was airborne. There was, I think, in previous foot and mouth epidemics if I remember rightly, someone may correct me, that in pigs in particular, they can create a huge amount of, they can shed large amounts of virus, and so you can have an airborne transmission, or whether the transmission was due to people walking their dogs, or due to farm machinery, or due to animals being moved around. So it was actually very similar to
Which does sound very eerily familiar.
But it's the same problem that although people had studied the epidemiology, the sort of the
how the disease actually works,
they weren't sure whether this exact strain would work in exactly the same way, and there hadn't really been the motivation to build population level models of the spread of diseases. So at the time, I was working in a group a group in Cambridge led by Brian Grenfell, who he and some other colleagues then decided to. Well, I think actually the person who got the government interested was. I won't say who it is because I'll just get it wrong. But anyway, there were groups from Cambridge, from Edinburgh, and from Imperial who either approached or were approached by the government to provide their advice. So somewhere in government there was the idea. It came to their notice that it would be worth maybe talking to some of these modellers. And the question there was, how do we control this epidemic so as to minimise the impact? And the questions were very, very similar. The questions were, can we stop it completely? Or if we can't, how do we minimise the effects so we don't have too many cases? And so what people did was to build models of how, the models actually were mechanistic in the sense that they had processes where infection would pass from one farm to another farm, or at some levels from one animal to another, but they wouldn't be too precious about exactly what was causing this kind of transmission. They would just say there is a transmission which happens with this kind of probability over this kind of distance.
So they could generalise away from what the actual thing that was causing the transmission or allowing the transmission.
Yes, I mean basically it's because
that was sort of unknown or controversial at the time.
It wasn't completely understood, but what was known was we could trace where the cases had happened in space and time. So we can then say, well, because this infection happened after this one, and it was so far away, that was a way to give us an estimate of what we call the infection kernel.
Yeah, and I guess you've got, because it's kind of livestock data, you've got a good idea of how many livestock there are, where they are, and the timing of that spread. I mean, assuming that people are reporting it or inspectors are inspecting it and fairly rapidly,
absolutely.
Then you do get that kind of...
Yeah, it's much easier to model diseases in livestock because of those reasons, and also because you, in many countries, I'm sure New Zealand's exactly the same. All animals are tagged. You know where they are. You know where they've been. You have a history of who's moved where. So
if they're bought or sold and transported somewhere, you've got all of that information. Yeah. Which cows were in the same truck as other cows or the same fence.
And by and large, sheep and cows aren't kind of getting on the bus and going downtown and going to the pub in a way that you can't really trace them. So it's a lot easier to be sure about how who's going to have contact with whom. I mean, there was still this uncertainty about what was causing the infection at long distance, but there was we modelled it. I was very, very much a small cog in a very big machine, but it was modelled using these assumptions about how disease is transmitted over distance. And from that, you could then you can model different scenarios and say, well, what happens if we were to, mostly people were talking about culling. So what happens if we eradicate all the farms within a certain radius? We have a policy where we say each time there's an infection, we then do what's called big culling. Yeah. And so on.
Which, again, is very similar to what was happening with the pandemic. So we were saying, okay, there's case here. We need to stop moving around all of Auckland because this is where our cases have come in.
Yeah, I mean, I'm guessing probably that there was no suggestion of culling people in Auckland.
We weren't ever thinking of culling people. We were trying to do the opposite.
We want to be tempted.
We were trying to do the opposite of culling, but just stopping that movement. Yeah. And I guess and that's with the foot and mouth. Yep. The way of stopping that movement is through just removing all the individuals that could be infected, whereas with the COVID pandemic, the way of stopping that transmission is just saying, okay, don't go past this line, and then it will stay there, and then we can kind of...
Absolutely, yes. So the questions were very similar. The obviously the measure that we're taking were quite different, so as I mentioned, that there wasn't really a thought to be. And it was one of those things where no one was really sure, but it wasn't thought that a vaccine would actually be useful at stopping transmission. Whereas in the case of COVID, it's thought that the vaccine would be sufficiently efficacious at reducing transmission, even though its main purpose was to reduce disease in individuals. But anyway,
also reducing, I think it was also reducing the severity of disease in individuals. So people would still get COVID, but a less severe.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So that's a... I mean, animal welfare was something which people were to some extent concerned about, but at the same time, people were much more prepared to take quite draconian methods with livestock. But anyway, the idea was then what you can do with the model is you can say, okay, let's pretend that we believe that our model is a sufficiently accurate representation of reality. Then within the model, you can say what happens if we cull within a certain radius of each case, or we do other things like we only cull certain animals and not other animals, and so you can model these different scenarios, and then you can say based on these scenarios what's the likely outcomes of these different control measures, and then you can make an informed decision, an educated guess. About what's likely to be the best approach for managing the disease, and
then it becomes a social question because then it's how much money you're prepared to spend on it, how much you need to subsidise various farmers, what levels you might be prepared to accept, which I guess gives that mirror back to the COVID pandemic as well,
and also I think quite similarly to the COVID pandemic, there was, I think governments were very ready to listen to the scientists, the biological scientists, and maybe didn't spend enough time thinking about the social sciences aspects of things, so the impacts, the economic impacts, and other kinds of impacts. In the case of foot and mouth, the reason why the aim was to reduce the epidemic and stop it as quickly as possible. essentially whatever the cost. The reason for that was because if we allowed foot and mouth to continue, even if it was at a quite low level, we wouldn't then be able to sell British meat products in Europe. This is back in the days when Britain was part of the EU, of course.
So the whole of the industry was reliant on removing it from everywhere.
Yeah. So essentially, because both the epidemiologists, the scientists, were saying this is what we think we should do, and the farmers are also saying yes, we want to eradicate it as quickly as possible. The government said, well, okay, that sounds like that's probably the best approach then, and that's why they went that way. But there were big impacts on rural communities, of course.
Yes.
And these things weren't really considered at the time. No one, I guess, who looked important enough was making a noise about it to the government, and that's the reason why that happened. So in much the same way, come the COVID pandemic, governments listened to scientists who studied the spread of diseases. There was certainly economical modelling going on, but I don't think it was all of the potential social impacts were really considered.
I'm sure that there were actual social scientists as well working on it, but perhaps it's who the politicians and the government at the time chose to weigh up when they're making those, like, it's not that the modelling was wrong, it's that potentially the people making... I mean, it's like at the end you've got this information, and then how you apply that information doesn't just depend on those models, but depends on the social science and those other parts of what we as a society, what we as a community value. And I remember with the foot and mouth, one thing that was very undervalued was the attachment of farmers to their animals and where they'd built up like the genetics of their herd over, sometimes generations of the farming. This is my grandfather's farm, and I've bred these, and there's small farms where they know every cow, and then you're asking people to cull animals that they knew were healthy, and so that was, from a modelling point of view, absolutely the sensible approach. But then there was there was very much a tension there between, and I guess there's always the kind of how well you know, and I think this was also a bit with COVID as well, how well you know the information of whether the person or the animal or the carrier actually has the disease, or whether they're infectious but they don't show the symptoms, or that whole idea of like being able to pass on whatever the disease is without having the symptoms yourself.
Like typhoid Mary.
Indeed, I was thinking the same thing.
So there's that kind of, and that's what destroys good models, really, isn't it? That uncertainty around.
Or is it an outlier? So can I just sum up? So with the foot and mouth, you come up with a model to control the disease without actually understanding what was spreading it.
Without understanding everything about what was spreading it.
Everything,
yes.
yeah.
So it's you do the.
It was big enough. It was robust enough.
Apologies, folks. I'm just going to turn this off.
What is it?
My phone.
Oh.
I turned mine off.
Sorry, I totally forgot to turn mine off.
So there was enough.
Hang on. Stop. We're going to have to start again.
Okay.
Can't have that in the middle of the show.
I don't know. Sound effects.
4:31, phone goes crazy. 4:32, we start talking again. So we'll just go back to, can I sum up? Or wherever you feel like going.
Oh, okay. So, yeah.
Sorry, not now. When we start. I just have to get it to the minute so I can say it's easy for Dolly to find it.
Are you going to leave this to poor old Dommy?
Yeah, hell yes. No, not really. Okay. 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2.
So to sum up, the model enabled you to come up with some measure of control without fully understanding the spread. So it was robust enough to. That's quite amazing.
That's right. That's the idea. I mean, I guess the point is that you need to be able to quantify the rate at which spread happens, but you don't need to know exactly what's causing that spread.
Yeah.
at the same time, if you don't know what's causing the spread, you don't know whether this rate that you're using is going to be constant over time, whether it's whether you've got it right, whether it'll change with the weather or whatever. I mean, I mentioned right at the start that I mentioned dog walkers just because that was one of the measures that was brought in was people were not allowed to walk their dogs in the countryside. People had no idea whether dogs might able to spread the disease, but just as a precaution.
But you're removing a variable, aren't you?
Yeah. But the idea that there was to make this infection kernel, this infection rate, more short-ranged and smaller. And by analogy, with COVID, I mean, we all spend all our time washing our hands all the time. And it's now thought that actually there was very little transmission which would have happened from people having people's hands. That probably wasn't necessary, but we did it because we thought, why not?
Yeah, well, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, washing hands also is very useful in a general sense.
Yeah. Indeed,
and I think that
diseases too.
It stops all sorts of diseases. And actually, in New Zealand, because we do this really cool. I put one data point in. Where the flu epidemic thing. So it's just the normal flu. And it had actually started before COVID. And so people just sign up to say, yes, I'll tell you. So every week you just say, no, I haven't got any flu symptoms. No, I haven't got any flu symptoms. Yes, I've got a flu symptom. I went to the doctors. And so they have this data and they had this data from the year before COVID. And then they had the data with COVID. And of course, with the year that COVID was, the incidence of normal influenza just absolutely flatlined.
Yep.
And a lot of people felt like, yes, we were at home, and obviously being at home was more or less stressful for people depending on what their general lifestyle was, but very much fewer people died from extreme influenza, which a lot of people who are older or sick or immune compromised die of every year. Anyway, and just the general incidence of it went down and stayed down the following couple of years because of that hand washing culture. And I just thoroughly recommend a hand washing culture, and we should keep doing that. So.
I mean, there's also the fact that the hand washing culture also makes people mindful of the presence of a pandemic and makes them more careful generally.
Yes.
Arguably.
Well, no, I think there's never a bad. There's no downside to washing your hands.
If you've got dry skin, there can be a downside to washing your hands.
Or you could be OCD.
Yeah.
Well, I could be, but...
Not you, but people incessantly wash their hands.
Okay, so back to... So we've done foot and mouth, and we've sort of touched on COVID, but did you actually do some modelling around COVID?
I did a little bit of modelling around COVID, yes. It was looking at how you model spatial spread. So... It was a bit of theoretical modelling. It wasn't using real data. So I should perhaps explain that when you're doing modelling, these kinds of process-based modelling, which is what I specialise in. I was assuming we'd go back and maybe introduce modelling more generally.
Yes, we should do. Actually, I did say, honestly, I think I got halfway through your actual introduction. Did I even say, I think I said Stephen is a theoretical biologist, and then I was going to say that you have...
we talked about physics.
That's right.
Physics, and then a PhD.
Also in physics.
Also in physics.
It was to do with models of the glass transition.
Yeah, and one was in...
They're both in Oxford.
Oh, were they both in Oxford? Yeah. I had a feeling that one was somewhere else. Anyway.
Nope,
and did I explain that Stephen is a theoretical ecologist using mathematical models to understand how organisms interact with each other?
I don't think you did, no.
I think I never got to the actual introduction to Stephen part, so I might just do that now. Okay. So you use mathematical models to understand how organisms interact with each other and with their environment. Particularly interested in the ways that these different kinds of heterogeneity affect how species coexist, invade and evolve. And your research kind of spans conservation biology, evolutionary ecology, epidemiology, which of course we've already talked about, and developing fundamental ecological theory or using models to address research questions in population biology from an individual-based perspective. And I think that leads on quite well to what is an individual-based model and how is that different to the type of models that you were talking about in terms of epidemiology?
Okay, so I think before we do that we should probably make a distinction between statistical models and mathematical models.
Go. That's a good place to start.
I think so, because because a lot of people who do a science degree or people who hear about science on the news will have heard about models to do with, which use statistics to understand data. And so a statistical model is about finding a way to find a mathematical relationship between observable variables, things which you've measured. And a statistical model doesn't really have to understand what's causing those patterns. So you can, for example, do a linear regression, a straight line graph. You have a graph.
So it's the most simplest statistic relationship that you probably start with. You've got one thing you've measured and another thing you've measured, and you plot them against each other, and then you draw a line.
I'm not quite sure why you're looking at me while you're describing this.
Well, no, I'm looking general around the audience.
Yes, that's right. That's anyway, so statistics is all about understanding real data. It's all about taking real data and saying what, if you like, what is just noise and what is actual pattern in real data. And so what you do in statistics is you assume relationships between your different variables. You assume that they form some kind of relationship, either a straight line or something more complicated. And then all of your activity is about quantifying this relationship. And then, as you say, testing hypotheses. I don't want to use too much jargon, but testing hypotheses, for example, you can say, is there actually is there a positive slope or a negative slope, or is there no evidence that there's any slope at all, for example? So to do that kind of modelling, you don't need to understand the processes which are causing your data. You really just need to be able to have measured data and then have a reasonable idea about what the relationship is between the variables. Now, process-based models, on the other hand, are about finding a mathematical way to say how one thing can cause something else. So I'll go back to physics again. There's Newton's laws of motion describe how things move around, how if things hit each other, what then happens later on? How does a missile fly through the air, for example? And so those are about saying there's this law which says how things change over time. And so process-based models at all levels are about finding a way to quantify the things which happen in nature. And let's take atoms again. Atoms have interactions with each other. Let's take a gas. A gas is a very low density group of atoms which hit each other occasionally. They have energy. They have you can. Back in the 19th century, people developed very good sets of equations to describe how gases behave when you compress them, when you heat them, and these sorts of things. So these were all about starting from the level of the atom, saying what do atoms do? Atoms are basically billiard balls, and then saying based on this, how do we then extrapolate to what happens at a larger scale? So individual-based models also start from the level of individuals, and an individual could be a cell, it could be an organism, it could be a town, but it's if you like one unit which we say has a certain number of properties, which might be the properties of the town might be how big it is, it might be how many people have a disease, for example, to go back to epidemiology, or if we're talking individual organisms, again, we might say, are they infected or not? Are they male or female? Are they adults or juveniles? How heavy are they? And so then you build a model which typically is then simulated on a computer. So you let the computer do the maths for saying how things change. To say, okay, these individuals move around in this way. When they meet, this thing happens. They mate. They have offspring. They fight. Whatever they do, they eat each other. These sorts of things. And so you have rules about how individuals interact with each other, and from those you then hope to extrapolate up to what happens to the level of a population or an ecosystem or a world or something along those lines. Now, typically, an individual-based model, the most natural way to think about it is the kind of thing that you might simulate on a computer. You can imagine it being kind of a 1980s computer game. There is actually a very nice
SimCity or something.
Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. There's a very nice software called NetLogo, which is individual-based modeling, which has this wonderful 1980s graphics. I hope the authors don't sue me for that, but it's very powerful and very flexible. They call it agent-based modeling because actually the technique is used not just in agent-based modeling. Yeah. They're not just used in the natural sciences, but also in the social sciences and across the board. So these individuals you can be modeling human agents, how they interact with each other, how they make decisions based upon all sorts of things, how wealthy they are, who they meet. Or they can be ants moving around, following a pheromone trail. So then they change their state based on gathering food based on the pheromones which they detect, and that helps them to decide where they move. And so these models then, they have rules which are then encoded in the computer. Then the computer can then run these models and see what the results are. And so these are very much the kind of models which are used in modelling epidemics, for example. They're also used in more broadly in ecology. Now, having said that these are most naturally simulated on the computer, what I was most interested in doing was actually finding ways of getting mathematical approximations to them.
Okay.
So the thing about a computer simulation is that you can start with an initial setup, and you can run it forwards and get one realization, one example of what might happen. And that realization is only valid for those exact conditions which you've given, and that particular starting condition. What you can do if you manage to find a mathematical approximation to it, which means you end up with an equation which describes what happens, is the equation then contains encoded in it what are called parameters. These are just the numbers which describe things like, again, getting back to epidemiology, how infectious the disease is, how long it's infectious for, how far people travel. These are then terms in the equation. And what that then means is that you can then, if you can do this, then you can then essentially study many, many different scenarios at the same time, because you have an equation which describes what the outcome is going to be. And that means that you can understand much better how these models behave, what sort of things they give rise to, and make, in principle, you can explore what these things do much more quickly. So that was really my interest, was in finding ways to
ask a lot of questions in one.
Yeah. Now,
can I just interrupt there? Does that allow you to have a better understanding of which of those variables are more or less important as well?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. So in statistics, there's various different techniques which people use to decide which variables are the most important. And in exactly the same way, if you have an equation which describes the outcome of a certain kind of experiment or a certain kind of historical series of events, absolutely, that's really mostly what you're trying to do, is to say, what do these different processes do? Because now these processes are reduced to a parameter, a symbol, mathematical symbol within your equation, and you can then see much more clearly what then is what then comes out of it. So I think it's fair to say that the computer modelling has become much more dominant over the past few decades. I say few decades because just
with computer speed and
computer speed, absolutely,
and
yes.
Prices of computers and
absolutely. So computers are, of course, much more powerful, much more able to run these simulations. But it's still the case that if you're able to get a mathematical description of how these models behave, you can still do it much more efficiently than doing large numbers of simulations. So it's really depends on the question that you're asking, and also the resources which you have, which is going to be the best approach. But computer simulation requires large numbers of resources, and of course much less resources these days. But they can only, if you like, answer very specific points, if you like, in the whole parameter space. So that's
blunt tool.
Yeah, I wouldn't like to be so disparaging,
okay.
But it is. It's
a different tool.
It's a different tool, and it's always going to be better. Well, so it's always going to be possible to simulate a more complex model than you can solve mathematically. That's always going to be the case. So if you want to ask a more detailed question in specific situations, you're always going to be better off doing a computer simulation. But if you want to be able to explore a wide range of scenarios, or to understand, if you like, what's going on, it's like what's the sort of horizon of what might happen, then a mathematical model can be much more useful, and it gives rise to a different kind of understanding. A simulation is a kind of in silico experiment. So an experiment
what, sorry?
In silico, inside the computer, in silicon.
Right, in silicon.
Whereas a mathematical model can be, and I say can be, I'll explain why in a second, can be a way of understanding things at a deeper way. The problem being that you can only understand a simpler model. So it's also true that mathematical models are used to do simulations too. So as well as doing individual-based models, the kind that I've described, where you represent the events explicitly within the computer, you can also write down equations which describe how things evolve over time. And those also can be too difficult to solve explicitly mathematically. So quite often what you end up doing there is putting those on the computer and then seeing what happens. What happens over time. So
you're simulating sort of multiple different
sets
points
of
like putting in different points for the data for those parameters.
I'll give an example. So an example would be weather simulation.
Right.
So the way that the people do weather forecasting is they write down all the equations which describe the dynamics of the air. The sun comes down, there's clouds, and there's rain, and all these things. So they have equations, fluid dynamics equations, and other things which have to go in there, which describe the physical processes which are happening.
Yeah.
But these are not individual based because we're not modelling at the level of the atom. We're still modelling at the level of the fluid. So that's a kind of an abstraction, but a very good approximation of what's happening. And then you take those equations and you simulate those on the computer to predict what will happen over time. So that's although you're starting from a mathematical model, it's not a, if you like, a computer model at its heart. It starts off with equations, but you have to use a computer to get the numerical solutions. And it has the same sorts of advantages and drawbacks as all kinds of computer simulation, that you can only simulate very specific situations. I mean, you can be quite clever, and you can find ways to quantify not just what's happening for that specific scenario, but also what happens in the vicinity of that. You can say, if you like, how steeply do things change as we change the parameters of our scenario. Anyway, so but if you have a mathematical equation that describes either a fluid rather than lots and lots of atoms, or a density of individuals rather than every single individual, then that's a much more economical way of describing what's happening, and you can then have a much better, if you can do it, you can have a much more economical way of predicting how these things will behave and ways of understanding them.
Because you're probably more interested in how the fluid behaves and how the individual atoms at some level behave. Yeah.
Yes, I mean, in the case of population dynamics, you're much more conscious of the fact that the things that you're quantifying, even if you're quantifying at the level of density of individuals, it's still individuals that you're thinking about ultimately. It's just you're abstracting it to a density.
It's an interesting comparison, because generally when you think about a cup of water, you think about the fluid of the water, not the individual atoms in it. But if you're thinking about a population of moths, you think about the individuals rather than
the group as a whole, for want of a better.
Yeah. Interesting though. Could you think of a population of moths as a fluid?
Sort of. Yeah.
Kind of is, isn't it? Like a community of
non-Newtonian fluid.
Yeah, non-Newtonian fluid.
Non-Newtonian custard. What was that?
Non-Newtonian fluids. Those are the ones that bounce on speakers, aren't they?
Yeah, broadly speaking, non-Newtonian ones are ones which don't follow the standard equations of fluid dynamics.
And are the ones that bounce on speakers,
for example,
those?
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry, just
quicksand and other things.
Yeah, just to come back to.
Well, I was walking across from the uni today for my cup of coffee, and the carpet cleaning guys were doing their carpet cleaning stuff, and I could feel the coffee vibrate. Must be from the. Yeah.
It wasn't an earthquake.
No, it wasn't an earthquake.
Earthquake's non-Newtonian.
Are they fluid?
I would hazard a guess and say that they're non-Newtonian, but it's way outside my area of expertise.
Yeah. No, mine too. It just occurred to me when I was hypothesising about.
Yeah.
Right.
So just to go off on a slight tangent, you were involved in an article around links between personality, reproductive success and repairing patterns in long-lived seabirds.
Was I? Oh, sorry, yes, I beg your pardon. Yes, that's right. Yes. So yes, that was quite a long time ago. Actually, it wasn't that long ago, but it was. Yes, sorry, I was the fourth supervisor of that PhD student.
Right,
that's right. Yes.
I was reading through it, and I thought within peer behaviour comparability might be an important driver of partnership success. And I thought this could be a
within peer partnership behaviour.
Yeah, within peer partner. I thought, crikey, this could be a couples counselling paper. I thought, and
yes,
despite the potential for the personality trait boldness to directly impact individual willingness to repair, it's sounding more like a couples retreat.
Yes, indeed. So I can tell you a little bit more about the data. So this is a PhD student who was working on seabirds.
Yes, sorry, people, you want
and
seabirds.
as I say, I think the third or fourth supervisor of this student. They were originally going to do a PhD which involves an individual-based modelling, and in the end they didn't. So I was still a supervisor of their PhD, but I was much more advising on some of the statistics modelling which they did. But what they were doing was they were observing seabirds, and of course, as I'm sure you know, many seabirds, the males and females take it in turns to feed their chicks, and it's very costly for them, for the individuals. They have to work extremely hard in order to do this, and then so there's a kind of a trade-off between if you're one of the parents and you spend more time feeding for yourself, it's more difficult for your partner who's back on the nest, and they feel like starved for longer. So there's a conflict between the two parents in terms of how they then go about their behaviour. And so Sam Patrick, who's the lead, the main supervisor of that PhD student, she's very interested. Well, she largely studies seabirds, but she also is very interested in this concept of personality, which determines whether you're bold, whether you tend to assert yourself, or whether you tend to acquiesce, and so on. So she was absolutely these characteristics of which you'll find in humans. You find very similar ones in seabirds.
Yeah,
it's really interesting, because you sort of because we think about it with the albatross always, because they're quite a big thing here in Dunedin, and we're thinking about the albatross and the chicks are there, and the parents are going off and bringing back food. I'm assuming that's how it works. Anyway, seabirds doing it, but it's interesting because I always think of them as a pair of parents working together to bring up the chick. And of course, they have an individual interest in it as well.
They do, absolutely. But
so
of course,
there's that kind of conflict there.
Indeed, there's a conflict. I mean, of course, they want the chick to survive, but they also want to maximise their own survivability too. I mean,
sounds very human.
Yeah, I mean, seabirds tend to be very, very faithful partners. They tend
I was just going to say, is like how faithful they are is like how likely they are to form another pair bond. Does that affect like this whole dynamic of?
I would say yes. But I'm kind of. It's very much kind of.
It just sort of seems like that
edges of.
Yeah, like that kind of like
scientific knowledge.
I don't know, to bring it back to the personal, like divorcees of a certain age are maybe not looked on as the best likely partners because there's a reason that they're divorced males wandering around in their 50s or 60s. Or 20s.
Indeed, yeah.
So I'm just wildly hypothesising here, but
Well, I was just thinking we can't experiment on humans, but could we take studies like this? And then
it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
We need to get one of your co-authors on the show here.
Yeah. Well, I'd certainly St. Patrick, I'm sure, would be an excellent.
Sort that out for a later show. Yeah. Might have to be a Zoom one.
We
don't have a budget for
the Antarctic.
Oh well.
Yeah.
If she's in the Antarctic, she might be flying through.
No, I say she's Arctic rather than Antarctic.
Oh, Arctic rather than Antarctic.
Board.
Oh, yeah. I know that's more problematic as far as getting her into the studio.
But these experiments, they're observational again. They're not manipulative.
Right.
So you can do observation experiments of humans too. It's just they may be a little bit more private.
I think it's called social media, isn't it?
Well, no, I think the thing with human studies of the same type, again, talking completely outside my area of expertise, ad-libbing, is I think it's self-reporting is the problem, is that people are very, very poor narrators of their own life. Like you just can't trust people to, and that's part of the problem with nutrition studies, is that you really can't trust people to actually report what they've eaten or how much they've eaten or drunk or whatever. It's just, and not necessarily even because they're lying, like they're to the person taking the data, but we tend to kind of, for want of a better word, fool ourselves into thinking we're very subjective in those sorts of ways. And I do know of a famous French study that was looking at way back. One of my PhD supervisors was French, and he loved telling the story about this French study where they were looking at genetics of something, I can't even remember what the thing was, in humans and how much it was passed down, and they had to abandon the study because so many of the second sons were not related to their fathers.
That's right.
And they, of course, they couldn't disclose anything, but they just was like, oh no, our sample size has crumpled.
I mean, truly what you said, so the... so again, this isn't my area of expertise, but there has been recently in the news studies about how monogamous humans are compared to other animals, and they are on the more monogamous, faithful side than others are.
I imagine there's some cultural differences there, though, as well.
I imagine so. Yes, I'm not going to say anything about the French.
No, I love the French, and it was a French supervisor who was telling me. To be fair, I don't even know what the study is. It's just it could just be total hearsay. Anyway, tell us.
Well, I was just thinking that so one of the things which you can do with humans is you can look at the lineage of males. So if you have a patronymic society where the offspring have the same surname as their fathers, then it's also the case that that sons have a Y chromosome.
Right.
So you can look at the degree to which the name, if you like, follows the Y chromosome. So
right.
And so when they first did studies of that kind, and again, this is not my area of expertise, and I'm just remembering it from a long time ago, but they were surprised at how much of a correlation there was. They was expecting that there to be much more
jumble.
Yes, much more jumble than they actually found.
Oh, right, interesting. Because obviously adoption would completely scramble that mechanism there.
Yeah. Yes, that's right.
As would within family, like brothers type affairs.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Indeed, yeah.
But presumably both those things are a minimal effect on a large population size. Yes,
this is true. And the adoption, I guess it depends what kind of data you have. If you have data on...
You might have data on adoptions. Hey, thank you.
So we could do an awful lot of modelling. Sorry.
Oh, no, yes. Carry on. I was just going to sum up there, but Trudy's already onto it.
Mathematical modelling opens a whole wide range of doors to a whole wide range of questions.
I think it's very interesting because a lot of people think, modelling, that's boring. It's just data. It's just computers.
Yeah,
but actually, you really get to ask an answer, or at least approximate an answer to, really fundamental and fabulous questions, and you can get right down to being like it's kind of like a skill or a game. It's actually getting,
if I take this out, what'll happen if I put
and
it
getting
back
really
in?
to the crux of what the question that you actually want answered is, and very clearly stating that. And I think that's something that our world in general could do a lot more of, that sort of idea. What are we actually trying to ask here? What is the answer what is the question that we want the answer to? And, actually kind of nailing down what it is we're talking about, and having, a very clear idea of what our different variables mean, and trying to clarify so we're all talking about the same thing.
I'd agree absolutely. With the caveat that of course, all models are wrong.
Well, of course.
So I'll just give another rather nice quote, which is a model is a lie that tells you the truth.
Yeah, which is also a very nice one. A model is a lie that tells you the truth.
I should say that actually I heard this quote from one of my colleagues who attributed it to Bob May. And I looked it up, and I couldn't find any reference to that. The nearest I could find was Salvador Dali saying art is a lie that tells you the truth.
Which, it's true. And maybe models are art.
Well, mathematical equations, I think, are quite...
Well, there's quite a lot of creativity there.
Yeah, quite beautiful.
Yeah. Anyway, I think that's a good note to finish on. Thank you very much for coming along today, Stephen. It has been very interesting and very informative, I think.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Dr. Stephen Cornell from the University of Liverpool, talking about theoretical ecology and modelling. Thank you for tuning in to the OI podcast. Please like, subscribe, follow all the things, send us comments on Facebook, spread the word far and wide, the OI podcast. You've You've been listening to the OI podcast, the shout out for the arts, sciences and mataranga Māori.
You can support this podcast by becoming a member of the OI. Check out the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences on Facebook or our website.
If you'd like to listen again to this episode or others from the series, look for the OI podcast on OAR FM's website, oar.org.nz.
Brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society of New Zealand.
This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.